Alrighty, well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to today's panel that we have aptly named Putting the Pieces Together Athletic Recruitment. My name is Reed Meyer. I want to thank so much the team at Laurel Springs for supporting this opportunity for us to kind of explore this ever-changing process that is athletic recruitment. I think everybody here can probably resonate with the fact that and you Google how to get recruited, and you're going to end up with a heck of a lot of responses on Google and a lot of different feelings and a lot of different silver bullets and everything in between. And what we're hoping to do today is provide some realistic and some really helpful tools from some folks that are either actively in that situation or have been spent a lot of time in that situation to give everybody a little better idea of what it means to kind of go through this recruiting process for college athletics. So first off, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Reed Meyer. I'll be moderating the panel today. I've been an independent educational consultant since about 2016, focusing primarily with student athletes. I was a baseball player in a former life. I played at Texas Tech University. I played at Weatherford College, and then ultimately ended my academic career as a full-time student at the University of Texas at Austin. I've always had a passion for college sports. I've always had a passion for high school and kind of elite sports. I actually wrote my master's thesis on predatory youth sport business models. So a little bit nuanced there, but definitely a field that I've always sort of been really drawn to. And I'm really excited. We've got four awesome panelists today that are going to give us some really great insight on what this whole thing is when it comes to college recruiting. So would love to go ahead and allow them to introduce themselves now. I think we're going to probably bring them on stage here. Uh, awesome. Okay, so Sophia, I saw you first, so I'm going to let you take it. Please introduce yourself to the group here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia. I'm a current sophomore at Wellesley College. It's 30 minutes away from Boston. I'm on the varsity tennis team there, and I'm also part of MIT's Army ROTC.
Awesome. Thank you, Sophia. Claire, we've got you next.
All right, I'm Claire Richardson. I'm also in the Boston area. And let's see, I played college golf at Harvard, what feels like a million years ago now. Um, After that, I was the assistant women's golf coach at Harvard and also assisted the director of golf there in the recruiting for both the men's and women's golf programs. And it was while I was reading through hundreds of emails from prospects that I had the light bulb go off. This process was tricky when I did it, and it's gotten even more complicated as time's gone on. And so that was 10 years ago. I started advising kids after I left the Harvard golf program, helping them better navigate the recruiting process so that they can find the best fit, find the school that most aligns with their goals. And the landscape has changed a lot over the last couple years in particular, but it's been really fun to work with student athletes and help them achieve their goals.
That's awesome. Thank you, Claire. Amy, I'm going to move over to you next.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name's Amy Bryant. I was a two-sport athlete in college. I played soccer and tennis. And then after college, I became the head women's tennis coach at Emory University, where I stayed for 23 years. And I retired from coaching in 2022 and started a business similar to Claire, helping student athletes navigate the college recruiting process. And I've been doing that ever since then. And I've helped athletes from all sports, not just tennis, definitely not just soccer either. So I'm happy to be here to talk to you about your journey and see how I can help.
Awesome. Thank you, Amy. And we were going to round it up with Jacob.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jacob. I'm currently at the University of Alabama. I'm a freshman where I play tennis. And I'm originally from Chicago, but lived in Florida for the past 8 years due to tennis. And yeah.
Awesome. Good stuff, guys. Well, I want to start this conversation where I think everybody should start this conversation when you start talking about college recruiting with academics. I feel like that's the part that sometimes we forget about. And Claire, I'm going to start with you coming from the Harvard side. I'll probably move over to Amy after that. But how important when you were working through not only during the coaching side, but now, how important is the academic component when we talk about the recruiting process? I think a lot of people want to separate those two things, but talk to us a little bit about how those two things are connected.
Yeah, I mean, they're huge. I think it's always going to be a component regardless of the school that you're looking at, but particularly when you're looking at some of the more academic schools, that's the first thing they want to know. Quite frankly, we didn't respond to somebody. Well, we responded to everybody, but we didn't really consider them until we had an SAT score. It was like if we didn't know you were academically viable, you could be the best in the country, and we can't get you in. If you don't have the numbers that match with what that school is looking for, you can only overcome so much. So it's big. It's always a degree, matters to a degree everywhere, but depending on the school, it can be massive.
Yeah, and just curious, when you were at Harvard, just if you remember even when it was then, what was that? Did you guys have a cutoff number for that SAT or ACT score that you
Yeah,
remember?
so we said we wanted to see over 1450, which is the equivalent of a 33, ideally 1500, and that gets added in with GPA and other academic factors. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, but that was kind of generally what we wanted to see.
Awesome. Yeah, I think knowing the hard numbers is always super, super helpful. Like you said, everything's a bit of a scale, but at least knowing sort of a general range is super helpful in that respect. And Amy, I want to ask you, coming from Emory, how was that for you guys as well? Was it very test driven like Harvard had in that situation? Was it more holistic? Did you do the same thing where you would respond to everybody, but maybe kind of know in your head like this is somebody I can actually recruit? How did it look like for you?
Yeah, I definitely made it a point to respond to everybody. And, being on the other side of the desk now, I know that's not necessarily the case of all coaches by any means. And I don't blame coaches for that. Coaches are receiving sometimes 50 to 100 emails a day. It's virtually impossible for them to respond to everyone. So I think the messaging here for our student athletes is to make sure that they're including the right information in that initial contact email, making sure the subject line hones in on the important information as well. And certainly the important information at a school like Emory was the academic profile, but also the athletic profile, and making sure that in the case of tennis players, that the UTR was around where we were recruiting. And then in the case of academics, that they had strong rigor in their curriculum. So you asked about the holistic piece. That was definitely really important for us. Is if, for example, the SAT score might have been a little lower than what we were looking for, if they were able to show that they were capable of taking as many AP classes as were offered by their high school and being successful in those AP classes, then that could certainly balance out, similar to what Claire was saying. It can certainly balance out maybe a lower SAT score. But we absolutely looked at all aspects of a student athlete's application in our process. But the two main pieces of information we wanted to see were the athletic stats and the academic stats.
Awesome. Yeah. And Sophia, I'm going to kind of jump over to you just to kind of get the student sides of things. When you were going through that recruiting process and starting those conversations with coaches, what do you remember about sort of that piece of the puzzle? Was that something that was surprising to you? Did that happen pretty early in the recruiting process? What was that like for you?
Right. So jumping off of what both Claire and Amy said, I'd say it was the emails, thinking about what kind of colleges I was interested in pretty early in the process. And then, honing in on the subject line, making sure I had attached my transcripts, my ranking for tennis, and, being able to maintain constant communication with the coaches throughout my high school career. And then kind of make the decision as, I go further into high school. So I think just keeping constant communication, being able to have many options and then hone in as you get a little bit closer to your decision is really important.
Right on. Yeah. And so with kind of that theming, so we've kind of covered that academic piece. Now I want to move over a little bit more to the athletics component. Jacob, I promise I'm going to come back to you. I got one specific for you here in a minute. But Amy, I'm going to start with you this time. So I think again, we talk about you can Google how to get recruited, and you're going to get 1,000 different variations, and everyone's saying they've got the secret, ingredient for what this looks like and what it is. Amy, I just kind of want to know from your perspective, and then I want to get Claire's. When you were coaching, and as you've kind of gone through this process with other students, what's kind of that ideal pathway? If you wanted, when did you want to first start to hear from a student? What type of information was going to be beneficial to you? What type of information was noise to you? just kind of what did that process look like? What was an effective way for a student to get started and really give you what you needed to have a successful recruiting timeline with you as a coach?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, there are a lot of things that a student athlete can do right, and there's not actually a lot of things that a student athlete can do wrong. I mean, we understand as coaches that this is really your first, for lack of a better, example, your first job interview. And you're not going to do it 100% right. And we understood that. So I think most coaches are very patient and kind with that. But I think something that really stood out to me was when a student athlete had done their research ahead of time. So in the case of Emory being Division III, we did not have any athletic scholarships to give away. And so when a student would email me and say, "What scholarships do you have available?" I knew that they didn't really do their research and they were just fishing for anyone to look at them as an athlete. And so, little things like that would really clue me into how interested a student athlete really was. And that genuine interest is an essential component of the process, because at an Emory, which is a very popular school, we would get a lot of student athletes expressing their interest in our school. So if a student athlete can make it easier for me by doing the research, knowing that, okay, academically, I've got to be strong, athletically, I've got to be strong. It's a great tennis program too. Knowing that financially that piece is covered, all of that can help to really set the recruiting process off on the right foot.
I love it. Yeah, and Claire, I want to move over to you kind of to see if you want to A, piggyback anything off of there, and then B, tennis and golf to me can be very quantitative sports in the sense of you have a score sheet, you have a UTR, you have these things. So when you think about it from a coaching perspective and now obviously from an advising perspective, how important are those numbers, and what do you need to do to put those numbers in context? Because I know, a 70 isn't necessarily a 70 and isn't necessarily a 70 in this case.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I think what Amy said makes tons of sense, and I'm going to circle back to that at some point, because it's one of the biggest things that I feel strongly about today is like, how do you show genuine interest in a school? And I think it's a huge element of getting recruited. But I do think that for sure, when you're starting, like you said, it's about the data, and you want to keep those first few emails that you're sending, which is typically the first contact you're going to have with the coach, really data driven, as I call it. And like, that's the numbers, both the academic, and then in a sport like golf or tennis where you have great data, it's like, here's my ranking, right? Here's the scores that I've shot at these kind of key events that I've played in. And I think that really helps those coaches who, when it is a first job interview or applying to a job type situation, they're getting hundreds of emails, they're spending maybe 20 seconds to read your email. Are they going to respond or are they not? It's like, what jumps out? And I think when you can share that well with those key pieces of information, very succinctly tell your story, as briefly as you can in still a meaningful way, that's huge. In terms of the timing piece, because that's a big question of like, okay, how early should I start this? I often say it depends. It depends on what you're playing in, and if you're, kind of an early bloomer and you have great stuff to share and you're going to be in a situation where you are naturally in front of coaches, like you're at a national championship event or something that's maybe hosted at the course, in the golf sense of a college school, like reach out to those coaches, let them know that you're going to be there. Because even if they can't communicate with you, they might flag that when they see your GPA or a PSAT score. So it's great to get on their radar early. But if you're not doing that, don't reach out in ninth grade. Like, that's a waste of your time. You don't need to be putting effort into that side of it. So I think it kind of aligns, a little bit with where you are in your recruiting process, with your skill set. But, it certainly can't hurt to do it early. Like Amy was saying, you can't do a whole lot really wrong. You're not going to get yourself in trouble. It's just kind of what's the best use of your time and what's going to, give you the most traction out of it all.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the way you describe that because it's something that I know even when I work with my own kids on this process, I try to talk a lot about milestones rather than timelines. I feel like people get really hung up in, well, if I haven't done this by this time,
Mhm.
then I'm somehow behind or I'm somehow not doing enough or I'm somehow not good enough. And I think we all can kind of agree that, that timeline looks different for everybody. And based on when you're hitting certain academic or athletic milestones, that then becomes the right time to reach out to different schools. And based on what schools are recruiting at that time and what schools are still looking for roster spots, that becomes kind of your right fit list of schools to look at, as opposed to trying to kind of, you know, shove a square peg into a round hole or whatever the analogy might be. So I love that you talked about it in that sense. And I think I certainly share that ethos, and Amy and I know each other well enough to now that she's in the same boat too. So that's awesome. Jacob, I want to flip it over to you on kind of the student side now. So, we've talked a little bit about process from the coach's point of view and some of these different things. I'm curious for you, as you sort of went through the recruiting process, were there specific moments or specific things that you did that you felt like made a really demonstrative difference in the recruiting process, that really got the attention of coaches, really got somebody to respond to you that you've been reaching out to? Was it a specific tournament? Was it sending that fifth email to that coach? Like what was kind of that thing that you felt that were some breakthrough moments in your recruiting process?
Yeah, so I kind of had a unique recruiting process. I started kind of late because when I was young, I kind of had to focus on going pro if I had the ability to. So I started it later than normal. And I remember one of the standout tournaments was Eddie Her for me, which is a pretty big tournament in Florida. And my head coach now, George, watched me play there. And that's kind of where I built the connection with him from the start. And we just kept in communication ever since then. And I was talking with a couple other schools, but not as serious or didn't have as much connection as I had with him, especially because I think the real life connection is more important than online and emails, because that's where you really get to know the person and kind of see if you want to be around them for 4 years of your life and eventually maybe even more.
Yeah, I love that point that you made, and we're going to touch on it a little bit more kind of as we go on. But I think that element of like, man, sports are great, tennis is awesome. We
Mhm.
want to play as high as we can, but shoot, if you got to show up every day and be around these people and be around this coach and have that person be your mentor or leadership role, you got to kind of like them.
Mhm.
You got to sort of like where
Yeah.
you are and like what you're doing. And we get so hung up in name brand, or we get so hung up in, well, this person's giving this amount of money or whatever it looks like, that we really forget about that part where you're spending a lot of time with that person. I mean, you just came from practice to come and do this,
Mhm.
Sophia. I know you're in the same boat. Like, it's a lot of time spent with people. You got to really kind of enjoy where you are and enjoy what you're doing. So, to your point, and I'll give you a chance to kind of iterate on that. It sounds like when you made that connection with your coach there at Alabama, that was definitely a difference maker with him versus other coaches, where it just felt you felt that sort of more connection to him as a coach, as a leader, as a insert thing here.
100%. Yeah.
Awesome. And Sophia, I want to kind of flip it over and give you an opportunity because we're talking different divisions and different experiences, but at the end of the day, it's recruiting, right? You gotta be proactive, you gotta reach out, you gotta connect. So for you, was there a specific thing that you remember in the recruiting process, a milestone? Was there, I know consistency and persistency a lot of times can mean a lot for a lot of recruits. Was it a tournament? Was it, knowing where you wanted to be and really attacking those schools aggressively? Like, tell me kind of what your experience looked like in that space.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the bigger milestones, because my school was a little bit harsh on the academic side, they kind of wanted to see the transcripts and everything, because I think from a tennis perspective, they were happy with that, but academics was really quite a barrier that prevented a lot of people from getting in or not being able to fulfill the process. So I think a big milestone was I submitted my transcripts to the coaches, and then the coaches said, okay, this looks good. We're going to go send it to admissions to do an early pre-read to see if we continue to talk to you. And if you're interested in this process, to continue, maybe potentially EDing to the school. And so I kind of had to wait for a couple months and, let admissions reflect if I was going to get a positive pre-read or not, whether that would mean continue talking to the coaches, because I did have some schools that were really academic and the coaches really liked me as a player, but couldn't really support me through the process because they wanted to support people that they were confident or pretty much 100% sure we're going to get in. So I think that's a little bit different on my side, but I'd say the academics were quite important, but also the tennis too. I remember I had recruiting videos because most of the coaches from the D3 don't travel as much as some of the ones to the big tournaments from the D1. So I think that's a little different. So to have a video, I'd send it to the coaches. And so that was able to, along with the UTR, that was able to give the coaches a pretty good idea where I was tennis wise. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think, like you said, kind of having that full package available. And like what Amy and Claire said, you can't, knowledge is power when it comes to these things, right? The more information, the more data you can provide, not an overwhelming amount necessarily, right? But enough for them to get their hands wrapped around, okay, who is this person? What do they look like on a court? What's that UTR in comparison to other folks? It's helpful to have that full piece. I've got a quick question for you on what you said. So you mentioned pre-read, and Amy, I'm going to come to you in a second to explain pre-read because that might be something that is more or less familiar to some folks. But Sophia, I'm curious if you remember when you had to put in that academic information to start that pre-read process. Do you remember about when that happened in your recruiting process?
That's a great question. I think so. I know I got the pre-read results back in August, and then I believe I had sent them probably between around, I think, March or maybe April, around that time. So it took a couple months, but I remember getting the results during the summer, and I think that was in between my junior and senior year of high school. Correct.
Awesome. Yeah, just to kind of give some folks an idea of kind of sometimes when that sort of generally happens. But Amy, I want to come to you really quickly. And Sophia, you mentioned pre-read. Amy, can you just give us the 10,000? What is a pre-read for those that
Sure.
may not be as familiar with that?
Well, there's a lot of components to a pre-read. So, but a pre-read, generally speaking, is exactly what Sophia said, and that is a coach will take a student's academic profile to the admissions office and say, I'm interested in this recruit. Can you please give me the green light on recruiting them? And the admissions office will come back and say, yep, you're good to go. You can continue recruiting this person. Or they'll say, we really want to see the senior year or junior year grades improve, or fall senior year grades. We really want to see how they do. I'm going to, I can't give you a definite, yes, they're going to be admitted, but, if they keep on the same trajectory, then they'll be all right. Or they come back with an absolutely not, this student athlete would not be successful at our university. We are encouraging you to stop recruiting this student athlete. So those would be the three options that could come back from an early read. Now, the other components of an early read could include a financial aid early read. And you heard me say before that I was at a Division III and we didn't have athletic scholarships. But Division III schools, what they do have is great financial aid. Some schools have better financial aid options than others, and financial aid is what is categorized as need-based aid. Division III schools also have merit-based aid. So these would be academic scholarships. In fact, I think the statistic is that about 80% of students in Division III schools receive some form of merit aid. So there is money to be had. And an early read at some schools could include a financial aid component, and it could include a merit aid component, so that a student athlete could know, and just like Sophia said, by August of the summer before senior year, they could know if they're going to get into college, their choice college, how much it's going to cost, where that money is going to come from, and if the recruiting process would continue with that coach. So it's definitely a nice place to be when that early read comes back positively in all those areas.
Yeah, for sure. And I think just knowing what that is, and again, we talk about those milestones, and then, being proactive in this process puts you in positions to have those conversations and get those requests from coaches in enough time to sort of go through that process. Because for some folks, it's different schedules, it's different timelines. And if you can make yourself effectively available to those schools that you're interested in and be able to share those different assets with them, it can make a really big difference in your recruitability, just from the fact that you're a couple steps ahead of everybody else. They've already got the transcripts, they know what they're looking at, they know there's an interest, there's elements that can sort of go into that. So I think super helpful to kind of have some context around that pre-read. Claire, I want to now come to you with a question that I love to ask any panel that I'm a part of, which is, what is the role of parents and third-party members in the recruiting process? How excited are you to hear from really anybody except for the student athlete in the recruiting process as a coach? And then obviously, what would you advise as sort of in your role now?
Yeah, really limited to no interaction with anybody but the student athlete is what we went for when I was coaching, and what I think a lot of coaches are still going for today. So there's a red flag in here and then an exception. The red flag is if a third party member reaches out to a coach before the student athlete has. That's a big no-no. And when that happens, we would always kind of like dock that against the kid, right? If you have somebody else reaching out saying, so-and-so is really interested in your school, it's like, great, where is he? Because we haven't heard from him. And so that was always a little concerning for us. The exception, the person that you do want to hear from is the coach, the person that player is working with day in and day out. Once they get far enough down, once the candidate gets far enough through the recruiting process that, as a college coach, you're interested in this person, you kind of want to know, like, what have they been working on over the years? And potentially even more so, you've spent a lot of time with this person. What are they like? What do they bring to the table personally? What kind of is their trajectory, their upside, their downsides? Knowing that this isn't an impartial resource, right? This is somebody who's very incentivized to give the best version of this candidate. But of course, you want to hear from that person. So, I think that as a coach, we're not tapping into the high school coach, and it's not the high school coach, but the outside coach that this player is working with, except for 10 kids. When golf we're recruiting 2 a year, we're not taking the time to reach out to all that many. It might be 5 even. So it's a really small number of people who are getting to that point where we want to hear from the coach. But yeah, parents, academic advisors, people like me, coaches don't really want to talk to me all that much. They want to talk to the student athlete and the one person who has worked with them for a long time on the technical elements of their game.
Yeah, I think that's a good reminder to all parents that, like, we know you love your kid so much and you want to help them, but this is one of those scenarios where it can backfire on you if you try to sort of do too much in this space. And in the same way that when I read college essays, I can tell when ChatGPT wrote it and not my students. I can tell when an adult wrote that email and not a student when they're reaching out, and that I'm not the only one who can pull that out. So I appreciate that point of view, Claire. And Amy, I quickly want to jump back to you and then jump to the students again here. But on that sort of piggyback, we talk about parents, third party. What about like recruiting platforms, places that will put your stuff up on a site and supposedly promote you to all the people and all the land? How did that roll into your recruiting process as a coach?
As a coach, I literally never went into an external database to find student athletes. So, there's some big companies out there that have some very aggressive or predatory sales tactics, to use your thesis here as an example, Reed. But there are some that are very aggressive in making families believe that they need to be in their database in order to get recruited. And that's simply not true. The one surefire way to get recruited is to advocate for yourself in the process. Don't rely on a third-party database, and instead just go ahead and email the coach directly. And I've even heard, there are a couple databases out there that have become more prolific with some sports. Volleyball and Sports Recruits is an example. IMLCA for lacrosse, or IWLCA for lacrosse, women's and men's. Those sites have become much more commonplace. However, even talking to lacrosse coaches and volleyball coaches, they admit that they don't go into those websites every day, sometimes not even every week, to look to see which recruits have messaged them. So it's really important for student athletes to reach out directly to coaches via the emails that they see on the websites, and that's the only surefire way to make sure that your messaging is being received by the coach.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for that context. I think there's nothing replaces direct to consumer, for lack of a better term. I think that's tried and true and has been for quite some time. So that's awesome. I want to shift gears a little bit here now. And Sophia, I'm going to start with you on this. I want you to talk a little bit about just kind of your experience as a student on campus, right? Obviously, we're talking about the student athlete piece, but you can only be on a court for so many hours in a day, and then you have to like, go to school and have friends and do other things and that kind of stuff. Can you talk to me a little bit about just what is it like being a student and a student athlete on campus?
Sure. So I'd say that when I first got to college, I identified myself a lot with tennis. And then when I started taking classes and kind of meeting new people, I realized that academics were super important and that, a huge chunk of my day was studying, going to classes, going to office hours. And so I think being a student is really important and you kind of get to learn that. And so I'd say I first went on an official visit to Wellesley. I think it was maybe late in my junior year, and you get to kind of shadow one of the girls on the tennis team or any team that you're interested and kind of see a day in their life. And you get to really understand what it's like to be a student at that institution. And I really enjoyed the class sizes, the teachers, and I'm having a great experience now. And I think being a student is a really big part about being a student athlete. And I think the athlete part is just a great complementary and basically having a team and having a family really and people that you can go to for anything, for classes, for questions. I think it's really important. But I'd say the student part, making sure you like how the classes are, making sure you're liking what you're studying, potentially majoring in is really important and a really big part that I think I didn't think about as much until I got to school and started living the day.
Yeah, I think we as student athletes in general, I mean, I very much was the same way as well. You sort of forget about all the other pieces until you show up and it's kind of right there in your face. So I totally get that. One thing I do want to highlight a little bit in your personal experience is the ROTC element, because I think a lot of people, those are college athletics, ROTC, those are two very large commitment situations. And so talk to me a little bit about just kind of how you balance that.
Sure. So I'd say I chose to do ROTC because it's I think a great kind of way to get into something else. Some of my family members are in the military and it's hosted at MIT, so it's not too far away. And so I really kind of was looking for new experiences in terms of teamwork, leadership, and so a lot of what we do in ROTC prepares me for some of those kind of skills that you're also going to need, not just in the classroom, not just on the court, but really in every day in your life. So I think balancing ROTC and tennis and academics has not been easy, but I'd say it's really worth it when you're surrounded by people that push you and push you higher. So I'd say a lot of the people around me inspire me. I sometimes when I have a hard day, look to the person to the left and they're doing 10 times more things than I'm doing. I'm like, if they can do it, I can do it. And so I think that's a great way to kind of be with people that uh, push you to your limits and kind of help you achieve and inspire you to do better. And so I think ROTC is a big component of that. And I'd say my college coach is super supportive of that. They help pay for my tuition, ROTC. And so I think that was very important for me and just a great experience. And I think it gives you a lot of leadership qualities that you're able to find on a team, but just a little bit more and prepares you into a great kind of career and you meet lots of new people. So it's very important.
That's awesome, and I think it's such an awesome example of, different divisions, different schools, all of them can provide different experiences and different opportunities, right? I think so many people wanna place these divisions in these tiers and say, "This is better than this because it has 1 less 1 or 2," or whatever, and the more you do this and the more we get to interact with kids, the more it feels like none of that matters. The part that matters is what do you wanna do? What do you wanna get out of college? And where is where can you go that's going to let you do those things and have that experience, right? And I love that you're able to do all of those things and you have the support of your coaches. And it just, I don't know, it's a really good example of kind of what that can look like in a place where you find a good fit. So super happy that that's working for you and that you could talk to us about it. Jacob, I want to shift over to you now. And with you being a freshman, I could ask you about those experiences, but it feels like you're kind of already in the middle of having them at the moment. Maybe you can report
Yeah.
back to us in a few months once you've had a full season under your belt. But what I want to hear from you is I feel like we go into college, especially as student athletes, with expectations, right? It's going to feel like this. It's going to do this. We're
Mhm.
going to do this. What has felt like it's kept up to the expectations? What feels like, okay, that's what I expected when I got to college? And what are maybe some things that have not necessarily been what you expected, whether it be time commitment, relationship with whatever, right? I'll let you kind of just go where you want to go with that.
Mhm. Yeah, so coming to college, I didn't really have many expectations in terms of like tennis or how practice would be, but I did have an expectation of kind of how school would be, especially being with Laurel Springs for my whole high school career, so to speak. It was just a new experience going to class every day. And I remember like the first 2 weeks in the fall, I was like stressing out. Like I've never studied this much in my life for like the most simple classes. I was just going through that, and on top of that, having long training days definitely was an experience. But I felt like I wasn't expecting to have so much training to the point where I was just exhausted. Compared to when I was training in Florida, I was having really long days, and I wasn't expecting college to be this intense or this time consuming, so to speak. I would think I would have more free time, but I'm literally awake from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., like doing something constantly. So it's literally like you're always doing something. I don't come back until very late, and I love it though. The experience has been great so far, and it's good to be busy. So that's a good thing for sure.
Right on. Yeah, I think you touched on something that I also had a harrowing sort of experience with when I first got to college. I did not know that my schedule could go from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. That was a new thing for me, and that it was pretty much
Mm.
scheduled out from those hours. I still remember calling my mother like the second week of college and being like, "I think I might have made a mistake. I'm not sure if I can handle this." And then, but you get to the end of the semester and you've kind of got your feet under you, and it feels a little bit better. But it's to your point. You have to love what you're doing, right? I mean, it is a core part of that experience. And we play sports because we love them, right? That at the end of the day should be, hopefully the foundation of what that looks like. Sports are supposed to be fun at the end of the day. So why not try
Mhm.
to make it that way when you're in college? So I appreciate your honesty in that, because I do think a lot of people try to put some sunshine and roses around the experience. And at the end of the day, like, it's a lot of work. You don't show up and do nothing.
Mhm.
It's a lot that you have to do, whether it's Division 1, Division 2, Division 3, whatever. So I appreciate that perspective in kind of what you bring in that whole thing. So shifting back to our coaching advising side here briefly, and let's see, who did I go to first last time? I think I went to Claire first. So Amy, I'm gonna start with you. What would be, I kind of call it like the biggest yes and the biggest no when you look at sort of a recruiting process, and maybe you can do it through the lens of a coach. When you were a coach, what was like kind of the number one thing you wanted to see from a recruit that really caught your attention? And what is kind of the number one thing that would kind of turn you off from a recruit, for lack of a better term, and something that they might have sent to you or shown you?
Yeah, I think Jacob kind of alluded to this earlier when he talked about the personal side of a coach. And so a big yes to me is when a student athlete can connect with me on a personal level. And whether that's they walk into my office and they see a picture of my kids on my desk and they ask about my kids versus just, glancing at it and then continuing to ask like what I can do for them. Um, or whether that's, a student athlete sending me a recruit sending me a text message saying, hey, I saw your team lost a close one. How are you doing? How's everybody doing? Like just those kinds of empathetic notions that a student athlete, a mature recruit can really show, I think helps me to know whether or not they're the right fit for my program. Because I certainly try to establish a relationship with all of my athletes. And, when I was coaching, I certainly did. And now that I'm retired, I'm still in touch with virtually all the players that I coached for 23 years because of that. So that's a big yes, yes. I would say a big no, no is, other than what everyone's mentioned before about the third party calling and, parents being a little bit more involved in the process than they need to be. I would say the cell phone on a visit is a big no-no. So I don't know how Jacob and Sophia feel about that, but I know that I had plenty of athletes come back to me after we hosted a recruit, and come back to me and say they were on their phone the whole time. They were completely uninterested in everything that we had going on. And looking back, I understand that these visits are definitely nerve-wracking experiences and anxiety provoking, and we use our cell phones as a crutch in situations like that. So I get it. So, I definitely would try to differentiate between which student athlete is uninterested versus which one was maybe just a little bit nervous. But if you as student athletes can refrain from using your cell phone on a visit, I think it would help you to get a better sense of whether or not the school and the team is a good fit for you. You'll pay attention to a lot more things happening around you if you don't use that cell phone.
I love it. Yeah, and I think you do a really good job of noting the human element of this, right? Like what Jacob said with his relationship with his coach, like what you're saying. At the end of the day, like we're all people, man. Like we got to get along. We got to be in the same room. We're all going for the same goal. That stuff needs to mesh and mesh well in those situations. So I that's a great point. Claire, I'm going to go to you to get your yes yes no no, and then I've got one quick question for the students, and then I think we're going to roll over to some audience Q&A.
Yeah, so same line, biggest yes, yes. People who really demonstrate that they care about you, that they want to be there, that they're interested for the right reasons. Because yes, playing a sport in college is really fun. It's also really, really hard. And there are today tons of reasons why people are interested in playing sports in college. And one of them is because they love the sport. And it's also financial. It's also getting into a school. It's also a bumper sticker. It's also an Instagram post. And like, coaches really want to know that you want to be there and that you want to keep working hard because their job success depends on their team performance. Not to mention, they are usually in this because of the people, because they love doing this. So finding somebody who loves your school, loves your program, wants to be there for the right reasons, wants to keep working hard is huge. And I'd say like today, that ranking almost doesn't matter quite as much. It's like if you're in the right bubble, from a performance perspective and you have that other stuff going for you, you're going to be a top candidate. It can go a long, long way. Biggest no-no, this isn't like a deal breaker for a coach, but I'd say it's the biggest no-no for a recruit is just never asking, where do I stand with you? Because if you don't ask, you're going to end up kind of floundering and you're not going to find out who's really interested and who's not, and you're not going to be able to make a well-informed decision. And it's going to be really stressful.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think so many people can be scared to kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of take that next step. And like it's a crazy analogy, but it is kind of like the most like ridiculous dating game you've ever been a part of. Sometimes, like you just have to sometimes put yourself out there and like hand the rose over and say like, "Do you want this? Too? Like, what are we doing?" Like to kind of understand what those next steps are. So it's a really good point. Yeah, being forward in that interest, I think, is huge for student athletes in that space. So that's awesome. Thank you both. I'm flipping over to back to our students now. I'm going to let you guys kind of finish out the moderator questions here. So a question I love to ask any of my kids whenever they go back to when they start playing is like, what's something having all of the knowledge that you have now, right? Whether it's a semester or a year and a half or whatever it might be, what's something that you would love to be able to go back or would go back and tell your high school self about this process, whether it be about college, the recruiting process? What's something you wish you could like beam back into your brain 1 to 2 to 3 years ago? Sophia, I'll start with you.
Sure. I'd say that it's definitely, I tell myself that it's definitely a hard process, but I think throughout that process, I was a little bit stressed and just wanting to decide and have it over with. And I don't think I enjoyed the process. I don't think I enjoyed, talking to many coaches, going to all these different schools, really learning. about what program could offer me and kind of thinking what I really wanted to do, where I wanted to be, and where I wanted to see those 4 years of my life. And so I think that's a pretty big decision, and I would tell myself not to try to rush it as much. I think obviously in the moment, you're like, "Oh, I just wish I could know exactly where I am, where I'm gonna be for those 4 years," because you want kind of that security, and it's hard to kind of be talking to so many coaches and not really having a great idea, a great sense where you're gonna be exactly yet, because I think we all like to be in our comfort zone. But I tell anybody going through this process that it's definitely a hard process, but if you do it correctly, definitely one that could pay off big time. And so I just say stay consistent and understand that it goes by pretty fast, and soon you're going to be in college and say, I don't know why I stressed out that much. I was doing completely fine. I was doing all the great things. And so I just say, stay consistent and stay positive throughout it, and understand that if a coach doesn't really want you in that program, that it's for the best and that you're going to end up really where what's best for you.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Sophia. The right fit is out there. You don't need every coach to like you. You need the right coach to like you. That's really what it comes down to. So that's awesome. Jacob, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I kind of rushed the recruiting process a little bit, and I was a little bit nervous coming into school, but ever since I've been here, it's been amazing. Like, I wouldn't change anything, and I absolutely love it here. So back to what Sophia said in terms of stressing out, I think it's unnecessary. I think what's meant to be is meant to be, and you're guided in the direction you want to go. And closed doors happen for a reason, and the right doors will open as your journey continues. So I feel like just trusting the process, and every day just keep reaching out and keep doing what you do.
I love it. Consistency is key. That's awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys dealing with my questions here for the last few minutes. We're gonna now bring Michaela in from Laurel Springs. Hello. And dive into some audience Q&A. Michaela, would you like me to moderate that? Have you been keeping an eye on that? How would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on that, and I can ask the questions, and then you can be a panelist at this point.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So our first question that we got is from Emmy, and she wanted to know that, like, we all know that coaches get tons of emails and don't necessarily have enough time to look through them all. So do you think coaches use AI to filter emails? And if so, how do we make those emails stand out, and how do those coaches sort them so that we know that your email as a student athlete is read? And if any of our previous coaches, Amy, Claire, Reed, if you guys want to take that would be great.
Okay, I'll chime in. I'm gonna say that I don't think coaches are using AI yet. Quite frankly, the reason why is I think coaches are really busy and they haven't built the AI to do it yet. A lot of coaches, their primary job is to focus on their team, their current team members. Recruiting is the thing that happens after that. It enables a good team, but it usually is secondary, which is why they're not responding, why most coaches don't respond to everyone. I think in order to stand out, I think put your numbers there. Like we said, if you can be as data driven as possible, I think that's going to serve you really well. Try to have a good subject line. Try to, keep putting yourself out there, because sometimes it's not the first email that gets a response, it's the fifth. And so I often say, until you get a no from that coach, like we're not interested or we're finished recruiting, keep trying. Make sure you have other schools on your list that you're moving along with in their process. But I think, at a certain point, if you're not hearing, there might be a reason. So stay at it and make sure that you're putting the effort in, and just develop other options as well alongside it.
Awesome. Thank you.
So we have another question, or two questions. Beth and also Gina kind of asked something similar. So I'm going to direct this to our student athletes. How did Laurel Springs help you guys throughout the recruiting process and preparing you for being a college student athlete?
I can answer this one. I think I did Laurel Springs for my junior and senior year, and I'd say similar to what Jacob touched on, there is an adjustment when you're going from a virtual setting into, actually going to class every day, having to, attend those classes and actively participate. But I'd say Laurel Springs gives you something that other schools don't. You kind of have freedom a little bit in Laurel Springs, but you have to time manage really well because, a lot of these kids that are doing Laurel Springs have lots of other extracurriculars. And so there's a reason why they have to do virtual school. And so I think the time management part that Laurel Springs taught me and, throughout my high school career is really important. And it's kind of what helps me be successful at school. Even though I have these in-person classes, I found that it's easier for me to do assignments. I'm able to time manage better because of the virtual setting. I'm used to kind of having, we use Sakai. I'm sure a lot of schools use Canva. And so it's quite familiar with the platforms, submitting work and you're on top of your work because that's what you have to kind of be on Laurel Springs. You kind of have to be on top of your work in order to succeed. So I think a lot of those lessons from Laurel Springs really carry on into your college career. There's just a tiny adjustment, but after those first couple weeks, I think it becomes a lot easier and you see the success.
Jacob, do you have anything for that question?
Yeah, I agree as well, especially with the time management piece. I feel being in school and being a student athlete, managing your time is one of the most important things. And I feel like Laurel Springs, combined with my heavy traveling schedule, taught me to manage time really well. And that translated over to now when I have 3 classes and I practice right after and studying after that. So I think it just all like kind of sets you up for success as you go on. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks. And then just to piggyback off what they said, here at Laurel Springs, all of our high school student athletes end up with 2 counselors. So they have a college counselor that helps them with course planning, applying to college on the academic side. And then they also will have an athletic counselor, which are people like me and Katie on this call who help them with identifying colleges that they might want to potentially play at, talking to them about recruiting process, talking about cadence of emailing coaches and reaching out, different platforms to get noticed by coaches and things of that nature. The next question is a tennis question. So Amy, this might go to you. So in tennis, we all know that there's a lot of international students. So Terrence is asking, because it seems ITF experience is more important to Division I coaches than USTA, most D1 coaches seem to have a UTR cutoff of 9.5. Do you think international experience with high UTA matters most, or is there another component that is equally as important in the recruiting process?
So I think that coaches really the universal way of looking at or the universal measure that coaches are using is really the UTR. And you can get UTR points by playing ITF. You can get UTR points by playing USTA. So all of these things factor in for coaches. If you're unable to get a ranking or unable to play ITF or USTA or even some UTR tournaments, if you're unable to play those, then you need to be able to share a body of work with coaches. What are you playing? So if you can piece together what you're doing internationally or domestically, just to give coaches a clear picture of your competition, that could be really helpful. And obviously video is essential as well. But, while you might be competing as an American with these international players, if you're better than the international players, and you can prove that and show that, then you'll be recruited above them. So that's the key. And I don't feel like as a tennis coach, and I can say this, like, I don't feel like it's necessary. And maybe Jacob has a different thought on this, but I don't think you have to go and travel to all these ITFs outside of the country to get these points to be able to show these coaches anything. You can do it all right here. And really could almost do it even regionally. and not even have to travel as much nationally as what we're doing in the tennis world right now. That's just my personal thought. I think we're traveling way too much. It's unfortunate for the sport of tennis, but that's a topic for a whole different webinar. So I hope that helped a little bit.
Yes, thank you.
So our next question comes in from Jocelyn, and I'm going to condense it down a little bit because she is asking specifically for Harvard recruiting. She has a sophomore golfer who, has strong academics, meets the SAT score, strong GPA, has good golf results. I'm so sorry. But her concern is, would Harvard have any additional concerns if her daughter is an online student? Like, would attending an online high school rather than a traditional in-person high school raise questions about her academic rigor or impact her negatively? So I guess, Claire, that would be a you question.
Yeah, I read this one. So I think, will it raise a question? Quite honestly, yes, because they're asking that question of every student who's applying to Harvard. Is this a rigorous enough schedule? So the online element of it, I think you just need to make sure you're selecting the hardest classes that are available. And APs are a great equalizer because it's pretty consistent. So if you're taking an AP equivalent class and taking AP tests, that's going to produce a really strong transcript. So Harvard's definitely going to question it. They're definitely going to say, ooh, what's going on here? Is this somebody who's putting their sport massively ahead of everything else? And as long as you're balancing it with a really strong schedule and saying, nope, I'm caring a lot about both. This just gives me a bit more freedom to train at the highest level. And oh, by the way, I'm benefiting for the reasons that Sophia and Jacob mentioned. Like, I have great time management as a result of this. You can kind of spin that story in a positive, even more positive way. So I don't think it's going to be a negative for them. It hasn't when I've seen it in the past.
Reed, I might direct this one to you, but if somebody else wants to take it, all good. Daniela, her daughter might not qualify for a Division I scholarship, depending on the level of athletics. We all know that scholarships are fickle across the board in all sports. But what is the likelihood of partial scholarships at the Division II level?
I would love to talk about this conversation. So I think there's two lanes that you can take in this conversation. So if kind of the source of the question, if you will, I think one being financial and one being vanity is the wrong word, but sort of optics maybe, or the idea that you have to go to a college that gives you a scholarship to have a chance to play, or because that's what the goal is. We've put all this time and money in, and we're going to get a scholarship. The core of the answer of can you get a partial scholarship? The reality is probably somewhere somebody will maybe give you some money. If you look hard enough for a lot of those things, somebody out there will throw you $1,000 and say, now you're on scholarship and you can come pay the rest of the way at this private school and have a good time. Technically, yes. What I would encourage this person to do is kind of think about why they want that scholarship and what the source of it is. If it's more of a, hey, I just need to get a scholarship, I can line you up 100 people that say it really only matters in that Twitter post, and it matters maybe to you when you show up, right? If that piece of it is finding a right fit school that you want to be at is far more important than being able to say you got a scholarship somewhere. For most people, it's the financial side, I would say. And what I would say to that is, I think we are under the impression that we weight athletic scholarships very, very heavily, and the numbers don't necessarily support that when there's other avenues for funding. So, for example, the average Division I scholarship today, you hear about all the people in football and basketball, they're getting the 90% of the new, revenue sharing money. At Division I, the average scholarship is about $10,000, and the total cost of attendance is $38,000. That's not nothing by any stretch of the imagination. Gets a little bit lower when you talk about Division II. Where really you can make the biggest impact is academically, and that's kind of why we bring that up. The total athletic scholarship money available in all of college sports is $2.7 billion, which is not nothing. But the total amount of academic money available at those same schools is $46 billion. So you can really, really benefit yourself, and you can stack that money too. So if you do find somebody that wants to give you a scholarship, you can stack that money academically. You can stack that money with financial aid and create a package for yourself that's really advantageous. But I would encourage this family to not necessarily let the scholarship drive where you want to go, and let the fit of the school pair up with your needs financially, whether it be focusing on in-state schools or focusing on schools where academically you can get some really strong merit packages. That's going to help you find a great fit, as opposed to worrying about where you can get scholarship dollars. I think we put a lot of emphasis on that when it really, for some, it's great, but it's not necessarily the thing you can hang your hat on. Statistically, you're looking at, like, I don't know, Amy, we looked at the numbers a couple weeks ago. I think it's something like 1.1% of people are walking away with any scholarship dollars or something out of high school students that are getting a scholarship live somewhere in that ballpark. So it's not the thing you should necessarily hang your hat on. It's kind of like buying lotto tickets and expecting that to pay for your school.
Thank you. Yes, it is. It's a tricky matter getting that athletic scholarship and then making sure you're not picking the school just for the athletic scholarship.
So the next question that Beth has asked, and this kind of, we talked about this with the yes, yeses and the no, nos, right? What do you look for in a student athlete? Are there qualities, experiences, et cetera, that set some candidates apart? So I think Amy and Claire, I'm going to point that to you guys first.
Claire, I think you might be muted.
Again. Yeah, this is a tricky one because to boil this down into a soundbite is really challenging. It's so many things. Yeah, I think I kind of touched on it before. A lot of other people did too. Like, you want somebody who's going to help your program, who can get into your school, and who's going to keep working hard and be fun to be around when they're there. So that's a difficult task to do all of those things throughout the recruiting process. But there are a lot of tactics out there that can help you achieve those things. And that ultimately, I think, is what coaches are looking for.
I always looked also for somebody that had a little bit of something extra, like a little bit of fire in the belly, so to speak. And, the only way for me to ascertain that was really to watch them play live. And when I say fire in the belly, I mean, like, when it's 6-all in a tiebreaker, are they the one that really, steps up and makes it happen? So I always look for that, but those are kind of differentiators if I'm deciding between two athletes, I guess you would say. But everything else, they've got to meet the athletic requirements. They've got to meet the academic requirements. They've got to be able to meet the financial requirements of the school, I guess. So all those things all those boxes have to be checked as well.
We're down to our last two questions. Thank you, Amy, for your response. Robert's question is an interesting one, and he specifically is talking about men's tennis, but I'm going to say this is happening across the board in all sports. There's a trend that colleges are taking some older student athletes between the transfer portal, international kids just being older that have had different educational opportunities than those inside the U.S. How do we see this impacting the process for true high school freshmen to be recruited? And I'll let you guys decide between yourselves who wants to take that one, because it's a doozy with the portal process.
I'll start just by saying that being recruited to play your sport in college is competitive. That hasn't changed, right? So these influences, these international influences, the transfer portal influences, these things are only making it more competitive. But I think it's rather than looking at how the opportunities might be lessened, it's a little more helpful to frame it in a way that you're looking for the opportunities. Meaning, if Division I or the schools in Division I aren't going to become possibilities for your child, then let's look some other places. Let's truly find the best fit. Let's find the place where your child will be recruited. So that's what I would say there. I think we spend a lot of time worrying about these influences that are out of our control. Instead, let's focus on what we can control. Because there are plenty of opportunities to play in college if you're willing to look at all of those, all where they exist.
Thank you, Amy.
So I guess that would be the last of the Q&A questions from the audience, unless anybody has any more coming through. Reed, we do have a final question for you. So if you could give one piece of advice to families starting the recruiting process today, what would you say?
Ooh, that's a great question. The most important thing that I try to instill in any family that I work with, kid, family, everyone included, is sports is part of who you are, not who you are. And it's very important to remember that during this process. Youth sports are different nowadays. They cost a lot of money, they cost a lot of time. There's an emotional tax. There's all these things that go into it. And as that happens, families get more and more sort of drawn into this to the point where we can sometimes expect some type of return on investment from this thing. I spent this money, I went to these places, I did this thing, and now all of a sudden on the shoulders of a 16 or 17-year-old is this expectation to return that investment some way, somehow. And at the end of the day, what college is an opportunity for you to become the adult, the person, the woman, the man you're supposed to be, right? When that sport ends, whenever that is, right? 18, 21, 30, whatever, now you're just you. And that's what you have. Are you the person that you want to be? Do you have a degree that you're proud of? Do you have hard skills? Did you meet and connect with people at the school you were at that made a difference in your life? Did you create a network that's going to help springboard you into that first job, that first career, did you meet a life partner? All these things happen during this phase of your life. And sports, we expect to be good, but sports are just sports and we can make it whatever we want to make it. So if you want to use that sport as an opportunity to create an amazing community of people that you want to be around at a college, that's great. If you want to use sports as a way to maybe jump into a school academically that maybe would have been a little tougher, but you can bring something else to the table of that school and they're going to, help you have that opportunity, that's great. If you can use sports as a bit of a financial boost in certain places for the right kid in the right situation to help you have a college opportunity that you may not have been able to have, that's great. But you're not owed any of those things by simply participating in youth sports and participating in the process. So when you start this, you need to do it with the intent of, I'm finding a full college fit. I'm finding a place that satisfies me academically, athletically, personally, and financially. And even though we love our sport, and even though we're spending all this time and effort on our sport, it cannot supersede the other elements of what goes on in a college experience. And I say this as somebody who has made my career off of sports. I love sports. I participated in sports. I am pro sport, but I also understand that it goes away for everybody at some point. And at the end of the day, when you're left, when the wood burns off, what's the foundation and what do you have? And that's what, going to a place like Laurel Springs, working with folks that care about your kid, that's the kind of difference it can make. And so if there's one thing I can instill in families, it's remember that like you're a person and then you're an athlete, and that all has to be satisfied when you go to college, or this experiment doesn't work. It doesn't matter how much money and time you spent in it beforehand.
Thank you, Reed, for that. And thank you to all of our panelists. We really, really appreciate you being here. I think this was a great topic. I think recruitment is tough and it's hard to get through. So just being able to have this conversation and talk about everybody's experiences is super helpful.
Thank you very much, guys. Had a blast.